Welcome back to the City Ramble. No beating around the bush, I'm afraid. Adam Booker, you're the only panelist, and unfortunately for you, you're gonna have to take the brunt of my rants because I'm ready to go. This is the podcast equivalent of hold me back. But let's get straight into it. I'll kick things off with this statement from yours truly. That night, Man City 0, Bayer Leverkusen 2. For me, is top 3 worst nights for Guardiola as Man City manager. Discuss.
I mean, there's been some absolute belters when it comes to head on Mars type Guardiola decisions, but you're right, it's certainly up there. And when the lineup came out an hour and 15 beforehand, and it popped up in all the group chats you're in and stuff, I wasn't exactly losing my head over it at first. I think I understood the idea of there is a good bunch of players that absolutely need to start to find their feet in this season. It can't be the Jeremy Doku, Phil Foden, Erling Haaland show for 60 odd games or however many City will play if they want to go deep in multiple competitions. You think about players like Ryan Aït-Nouri, who coming into this season, most of us thought he was nailed on to be the starting left back, and then obviously gets injured. Nico O'Reilly comes in, is phenomenal. But players like Omar Marmoush, John Stones, who I think most of us thought there was nowhere near any plans coming into the season, but he's starting for England every time they play any sort of qualifier or even a meaningless friendly. All sorts of players that you think would be key contributors going forward this season. Tijani Reinders is another who has done very little since the opening day at Wolves. But when you make 10 changes, it felt more like a Carabao Cup team in the sense that there's rotation, knowing that you have, 3 Premier League games in 8 days on the horizon and all that kind of stuff. But then there's just simply, 10 changes is insane. It's absolutely insane.
It's bonkers.
For a game that has lots of meaning. I believe Pep Guardiola himself called it a must-win heading into the game, and B is against decent opposition. I know
the
I know
third in
that,
the Bundesliga. It's not. You do that for a third round League Cup game against Watford at home or something like that, or Swansea away. I don't know. I have to go back. I don't think he made 10 changes for the Swansea game a couple of weeks ago. I think you know what, and obviously that was a brazen start to the episode, and as it goes on, I will try and sort of explain my reasoning. But I think it reeks of arrogance, I think it absolutely reeks of arrogance to the point where Guardiola has picked a team, and look, we will never know, I don't think, the true reason behind it, because we'll sift through some of the post-match quotes, and a lot of it is, the usual stuff. I take responsibility. Had it worked out, you'd all say I'm a genius, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is it didn't work out, and I think from sort of the first, City come close about 5 minutes in, but from maybe like the 6th minute onwards, it was very clear it was a team of 10 players who are either not fit enough, haven't played enough football, in some cases you would argue not good enough, playing together for probably the first time or the first couple of times this season. But I think the reason I say it reeked of arrogance, because I agree in the sense that part of the reason I think was to try and play some of these players into form a little bit. But again, you do that in the League Cup, or you do it in fits and starts. You do it, had this been 5 changes, I don't think any single person is complaining, because it felt like, a bit of refresh after the weekend, which wasn't a great performance, but it was fine on the most parts. There were some tweaks that needed, referee decisions, whatever. But I think, it's funny because on the preview show we were saying this felt like the perfect opportunity to bounce back after what was a frustrating result. The fact it was the Tuesday game as well, perfect. Shake it off straight away. I think you'd have had to. I think I would have had to guess like the pitch exploded and swallowed everyone up to be in this sort of mood, at full time, because I didn't for a second think City are going to turn up, roll by Leverkusen over, because we spoke about it on the preview show. They're a good team. They won the Bundesliga title a matter of 18 months ago or something like that. Obviously there's been plenty of changes, including this season with the manager, but they've been on a bit of a tear and they've rebuilt really well, and the solid team, a really, really solid team. And I don't know, Adam, you're looking at the starting 11 here. Nico Gonzalez, funny that the man that couldn't get into the starting 11 just a few months ago is the only guy that retains his spot. But that front three of Oscar Bob, Marmoush, Savino, for different reasons perhaps, they've not scored a goal in the Premier League or the Champions League this season. That to me is arrogance. Double pivot. To be fair, I thought Rico Lewis was possibly unfortunate to have been taken off, and I don't mind seeing Tajani Reinders play a bit closer to goal. But it's clear that I haven't been as negative or down on Tajani Reinders' performance since the Wolves game. I think he has had moments. Dortmund, for example, a couple of weeks ago, but he was playing in a good City team. That's to me how you go about these Champions League phase matches. You make 3 or 4 changes, and if it had been 5 or 6 this game, fine. James Trafford starting, okay, cool. He might have been impressing in training, and Pep's going there. Oh, I feel a bit sorry for this guy, but this isn't a charity. You know what I mean? Like, and one of the things I want to speak about straight off the bat, because we obviously start with the lineup, and I think the lineup's going to dictate pretty much all of the conversation here. But we have to now deal with the fallout. That to me is such a momentum killer for a team that has worked, in my opinion, incredibly hard to make slow progress, small steps away from what was last season. I tell you what, I'll be honest, at times on Tuesday night, I felt like I'd gone back in time 12 months and I was watching the same team that just couldn't buy a win last year. That's what it felt like. And I do fear maybe we get to Saturday against Leeds, they put 5 past them, and then we're not, we never think about this game again, hopefully. But I fear for the implications because it could have a knock-on effect on the league form. But if we come to January and City miss out on the top 8, goodness me, this result, which I think is still incredibly bad, looks even worse.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's 1,000,001 implications that come from it. And when you talk about the lineup, I mean, like I said on the off, I think a little bit of rotation made sense because you're now heading into that period of the season where you're going to be playing Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, just about every single week. And sometimes that's going to be 3 Premier League games in a row. And that's where City do their damage. If they're to make up any sort of ground on Arsenal, it tends to come in this period of the season where you're playing so many games so quickly, you can get that momentum. But I think after the result at Newcastle on the weekend, you're right that coming out of the international break, where an international break you went into with such momentum after the victory over Liverpool and all that kind of stuff, and you come out of that with the result at Newcastle, which by and large I think was a fine performance. I think there was so many moments that a couple.
It wasn't Villa, for example. No. It wasn't Brighton. It wasn't Spurs or any of the defeats that you've had this season.
A couple of blatant missed chances and blatant referee decisions go the other way, and City walk out of St. James's with 3 points on another day. But I think you're right that coming into this game, it's now a chance to, similarly to Dortmund and to Napoli earlier in the season, where you come into this game against good but not great opposition. Opposition that's good enough that if you beat them, it's a big momentum boost. It's something to build from. But if you're not on top of your game against a team like Leverkusen, they'll punish you, as we saw twice last night. So yeah, I think it's just absolutely ridiculous to make 10 changes when it's funny you bring up that word arrogance, because I think Pep has kind of had a reason to have that arrogance in the past where you could make 10 changes. I don't know about 10, but you can make 7 or 8 changes 3 or 4 years ago, and the players who couldn't get into the quote unquote best 11 coming off the bench might have been Gabriel Jesus and Riyad Mahrez and Raheem Sterling, and the list goes on of players that will step in and do a job even if they aren't playing at the weekend. But you don't have that now. At no point has Oscar Bob proved that he's anything but a player that was really bright in the academy and has done nothing at the senior level.
Savino, but you know what as well? I think you make a totally perfect point, and we can bang on about the squad depth, and that is something that obviously has been neglected and in recent transfer windows tried to be addressed. But take for example, I think Champions League quarterfinal always used to fall before the FA Cup semi-final, and City would make loads of changes for those games, and it might not have been 10, but it was still a lot. And those players come in and they don't look like a coherent team because they haven't been playing regularly. I don't think you can ever expect to make that many changes, and in maybe again against lower league opposition in a cup game, but against a good Champions League opposition. You could have brought Messi off the bench, 2010 Messi and Iniesta and Xavi. I don't think that to me is just a complete howler because you can never expect a coherent performance when you do that.
The other thing that when you talk about the squad depth, it's not only just simply depth and quality that these 10 changes, almost all 10 players coming on were of lesser quality than the 10 that they were replacing, but it's also a different type of team. Like when it was 2018 or 2020 or whenever, and Pep made these rotations, this sort of the system of play and the types of players that were coming into the team were so familiar with one another, and they were familiar to the players that they were replacing. Whereas now, when Ryan Aït-Nouri steps in for Nico O'Reilly, it's a completely different role. Like Aït-Nouri stepping into midfield and inverting, and Nico O'Reilly is someone that, as we saw when he comes on, is going to bomb up and down. Obviously, he does step into midfield,
And they're
he
two
has
of
that
the more
ability.
familiar ones. You know, like Nunes for
Exactly.
Kusno, for example. It's chalk and cheese.
Exactly. And obviously, no one really replaces Erling Haaland in any sort of way, but Marmoush is just clearly a player that we've seen that struggles to lead the line by himself. He's been great in the past as sort of a second striker or an inside forward or
And he
whatever
didn't do
you
it
want
at
to call it.
Frankfurt either, which is a
No,
mad thing. It's
he didn't.
absolute madness.
Yeah. So not only is there a drop in quality, but it's also not recognizable to the way you play at the weekend. So it's just, yeah, it's an absolute head scratcher all around. Well, more than a head scratcher, it's a head bang into the waller. Because now you've set yourself up to potentially need to go get a result at the Bernabeu, which has never ever been a happy hunting ground for City. And you've also learned a lesson here where you know you can't rely on some of these players. And now, you're going to have to rotate again in these next 2 months when you're playing Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday every single week. Do you have much faith at the weekend? Is the game at Ellen Road at the weekend? I think it is.
No, it's at home. It's at home, which is a small saving grace, but even still.
If it's 0-0 in the 70th minute, you have any faith in Oscar Bob coming off the bench and changing the game? Do you have any faith in Savinho coming off the bench?
Well, clearly he fucking does. Clearly, he does have faith in Savinho because he's put fucking. I mean, that's the thing.
We can talk. We can talk about the subs because interestingly, I thought the subs that were made at halftime, only Oscar Bob was the one that needed to get the hook at halftime.
Yeah.
I thought Rico Lewis was fine.
Agree.
I thought Ryan Aït-Nouri was fine.
Ryan Aït-Nouri is a little bit sluggish. Like he gave the possession once or twice, but again, he's played next to no football. He made a great block in the first part. Rico Lewis, for me, actually was probably the best player on the pitch from a City point of
view. Until the first Leverkusen goal, City were in total control of the game, and I thought everything ahead of. I thought from James Trafford to Johnny Reinders, everything was fine. It was when the ball ended up at the feet of one of the wingers or Omar Marmoush or whatever, it just died. And it's interesting because that game, I think 2 or 3 seasons ago, we would have said, yeah, that looks about right. Up until the probably the second goal. Yeah, that looks about right. It's, City had control. They were recycling the ball. They were trying to probe. They just, with the rotation that they made, they just didn't really have that sort of cutting edge. Whereas now, when you go and watch City at the weekend and you see how dynamic they are, how direct they are, how aggressive they are with we'll call it the A team now. It's day and night now when you go to Savinho and Oscar Bob, who just try and probe and recycle the ball and all that kind of stuff. So not only is the like I said, it's a drop in quality, but also it looks totally different. I mean, I texted like 15 minutes into the game saying, "Wake me up when something happens," because that's how it felt. It was an absolute snooze fest from Johnny Reinders onwards. So, yeah, there's 1,000,001 things that you could tackle with this, but you're bang on, like you said at the top. At the end of the day, it all falls at Pep's door because he's the one that put those players in those positions.
Yeah. There's one or two which maybe we'll touch on in part 2. I mean, I'll let the masks slip a little bit there, and I want to be careful because I'm never one for sort of piling in on individual players, and because circumstances and whatnot. But for me, obviously, Savinho is the guy getting a lot of stick at the moment. I'm going to say it again. I think it's bad man management to have him in the firing line. It's clearly not working. I thought it was a disgraceful cameo from Savinho at the weekend when he came on. Really had the moment to go and sort of I'm not demanding a goal or I'm not demanding a moment of magic or whatever, just the bare minimum. If you'd have asked me does Savino see the pitch against Leverkusen? I said maybe the last 15 if City are 3-0 up, game done and dusted. The fact he started, I thought was mind-blowing. The fact he saw the game out, and I think it was summed up by that that slip late on when he sort of broke through. And at that point, you just go in, get this boy out the firing line for his own sake. Because again, you made the good point. Like, what happens now when these players need to be turned? And I think Jack Garn in obviously the Daily Mail wrote in his piece, Guardiola was looking for who he can call on, but you don't do that in November at this point. The way City have worked so incredibly hard, and Guardiola himself, I think, deserves an awful lot of praise on the most part for how he has conducted the rebuild so far this season. Because I imagine at times, you think of the way City have lost matches, it must be frustrating for him because he's been so used to sort of perfection and we call them bozo moments or the lack of in previous teams. This, it has been, City have been liable to one or two of those things this season. And I think, he's conducted himself incredibly well, and obviously the coaching team as well. And, look at Nico Gonzalez, for example, look at the way Jeremy Doku's come into form, the impact Donnarumma's had, blah, blah, blah. This for me is just like pressing the self-destruct button. And again, hold our hands up. It might be a case of going and beating Leeds 5-0 and you go away to Fulham and you beat Sunderland and suddenly you're like, okay, fair enough. In the context of the Champions League, which I guess we'll do quickly before the break, that's now 3 matches of the league phase that remain. And I can understand, like, some people might be listening to this going, why are they losing their heads this much, blah, blah, blah. It's hard to keep abreast of what results mean in the Champions League, and the I've seen Jeff Stelling, for example, who guys in the UK will obviously know, but maybe if you're listening elsewhere, he's a prominent talking head, football talking head. He's come out and said, this Guardiola starting 11 is proof that there's no jeopardy in this Champions League. But we obviously don't know the results from Wednesday night's matches. Fingers crossed there's 1 or 2 games that go City's way, but there's every chance that City end this round of fixtures outside the top 8. And Adam, City have gone from a position, in my opinion, where, let's say, they get a draw. For whatever reason, they don't even beat Leverkusen. That'd have put them on 11 points with 3 games to go. Last year, the benchmark was 16 points. So you're looking at 5 points from the next sort of possible 9. City now have the Bernabeu away, Real Madrid away. They've got Bodo Glimt away. Again, Arctic Circle, plastic pitch, start of January. Not ideal. I didn't see. Did Juventus slip up there tonight? I know Juventus were playing. Why isn't football? Everything's not working today.
No, they came won away at Bodo Glimt.
They came back. I think there was a point at halftime where Juventus were losing, but still, difficult place. And then Galatasaray at home, who, again, they lost tonight, which is probably a bit of a decent result from City's point of view, but they've been a team that have got, results in them this year. To me, it's just madness, absolute madness, because, we speak about implications, and this is obviously long term. It's like, if you get into that, miss out on that top 8, and then you get drawn in the playoff round, and then you get knocked out in the playoff round, I think everything circles back to this game. And that's that's not on.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And you're right about, like, if you're going to do this sort of rotation and try and play some of these players into form, you do it in drips and drops, right? I mean, that tended to be Pep's MO when it came to this type of rotation. I mean, how often did we see, maybe 3 or 4 academy kids come in against Burton, but then also Kevin De Bruyne, Sergio Aguero, and David Silva playing in the same team? Yeah. And that's the thing that's so baffling about that team selection and how it impacts you going into the next week, where you've got 3 Premier League games in 8 or 9 days. Is it would have made some sense if maybe it's John Stones comes in next to Ruben Diaz, and maybe you stick to Johnny Reinders in the midfield for Bernardo Silva, and Savinho comes in for Doku. But you still have, like, in that team, you'd still have Happy Birthday, by the way.
I'm honest to God, people who aren't watching on the YouTube stream will have no idea. But celebration balloons have just popped up on my screen. I feel like the world is laughing.
StreamYard has heard us just bitching and bitching and bitching, and thought we might need a little bit of joy pop
like
up.
Doing
on the
griddy on us, like teabagging us. Oh,
God. But if you do those little drips and drops of rotation, you still have some sort of semblance of spine of the team put together that can bail you out of specific moments or whatever. And I think this is something we can come on to in part two. But I mean, once Leverkusen went 1-0 up, did you feel like anything was going to happen?
No,
Like, did you feel like City were coming back? I think at the weekend, when City went level at St. James's Park, it was their first leveling goal this season.
that's mad. Like when you consider
that's not to say that they've not been behind this. They've been behind plenty this season. It's just once they're behind, they stay there, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, again, City before Saturday were obviously second in the table and obviously unbeaten in the Champions League. It's not like City have played bad. And look, you can look at you can say, like you say, it's not like City haven't been behind before, but you can also say, well, a lot of the time they have led, but like that's weak. And I think we spoke about it a little bit in the first part of the preview show yesterday, in the sense that you can't expect this team to have a killer mentality like other City teams have had. That would be unrealistic. But it's stuff like this for me which I think just doesn't help at all. And say for example, as you said before, in an upcoming match, these players need to come off the bench. The confidence is shot. I think there was quotes from John Stones after the match, maybe to TNT. They were aggregated on City Extra anyway, and he was asked about the dressing room, and he said like the mood's low. And again, it's going back to last season. That John Stones interview, I've not been able to watch it or read it in full, but it's the same sort of stuff that we were having coming out last season, and it feels like we've got in a time warp, and that hasn't been the case. Spurs defeat, Brighton defeat, for me personally, I put that down to the fact that City just physically weren't ready for the season. They'd obviously had a massive layoff, one pre-season match. Wolves, as we've seen, have been bobbins this year. Those two teams were fitter. They ran City over, changes, intensity, whatever. The Villa game, I put it down to just complete bad day at the office. Newcastle, we've talked about the factors there. Lost for words. I think possibly a good point to take a breather. We'll be back. The good news is we've got the free word review, so it'll be time for the social media followers to give us their thoughts, and it's just as intense. That'll do for part one. Join us after this. Welcome back to the City Ramble. Making sure, if you can, to be following, subscribing, wherever you're watching or listening. If you've got kids in the car, this is your warning to maybe turn it down, because some of these do get a little bit expletive. Let's kick it off with Kelkster. Utter fucking shit. Keith says that's on Pep. Michael asks, is Pep okay? Anthony says absolutely fucking shit. So there's two swear words in that one. Ian keeps it simple, says awful, awful, awful. Sorry, Steve. I don't know. I don't think Joe Butterfield will be happy about this. Steve says Savinio Oldham loan. To be fair, I'm not quite sure in this current form Savinio would be getting.
I think
into
Joe
women's
Butters
short
already
amateurs.
has a big enough platform for abusing wingers. He doesn't need another one in his life.
Yeah. Denzel says shower of shit. This is interesting. Someone says, I miss Kovacic. Joe says, I miss Kovacic. I mean, to be fair, he's a good player, and you could possibly bring him into that team. He does add a little bit of quality, but I'm not sure he saves the night there. Any action _ says straight dog shit. Our man looks to the future and says Leeds, Fulham, Sunderland. The frustrating part, there's not a million frustrating parts. One of the frustrating parts for me was the fact that halftime rolls around and we see the admission of guilt straight away, because there's 3 changes, and look, how many times have we been as a collective, fan base watching the match, calling out for changes, and Guardiola, through stubbornness or just sheer belief in the plan, says no, I'm not changing it, and obviously, who are we to question him? But at the same time, there have been moments where you're looking at a game and going, this needs to change. Straight away, 3 changes come on. And why I found that so frustrating was because you're just playing the players that would have played anyway. You're just playing Doku, you're just playing Foden. Obviously, Haaland comes on a little bit later. But if they were in desperate need of a rest, or you felt like you were in desperate need of shuffling the pack a little bit, I don't think anyone would have complained too much. Say, for example, City were 1-0 down at the break, but he took Doku and Foden off at half-time and brought on whoever, Reinders, Marmoush, whoever. I don't think anyone's complaining that much because you see the big picture there and you go, obviously they've played a lot, it's not working, whatever. To do it the opposite way around, though, I just think is so. It's a complete net negative for everyone involved. And look, maybe we try and move the conversation away from selection and lineup, but I don't know if we can, because for me this is just the sole reason of it. Like, tactically, what do you say? Because it is what it is. I feel like so many of City's problems stem from this.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think there is a very, very, very slight sort of hindsight here where if it's not such a disaster, then yeah, you can see the bigger picture of specifically this season where Pep has more than most had his sort of 12 players that he's going to roll with every single day. And this is really the first time we've seen him deviate from that. You know, earlier in the season, maybe it was Reinders for Bernardo Silva or whatever. But since basically the Manchester Derby, it's been 12 of the same players every single week. Doesn't matter the competition. He rolls them out. So this was eventually coming where you're going to have to start to play your Ryan Aït-Nouris and Kusanovs. And again, like I said, I think there is a mixture of players in this lineup that some of them are players that you absolutely need to get into some sort of semblance of form if you're going to go deep in any competitions. I would put in that basket Omar Marmoush, Abdou Kadir Kusanov, probably one of the center backs. I don't think it really matters between Nathan Ake and John Stones. Tijani Reinders is certainly in there, and probably Ryan Aït-Nouri. I think those are 4 or 5 players where you know that the level we got from those players tonight is not their level. Like we've seen certainly from Reinders, we've seen from Kusanov, we've seen from Marmoush last season that their level is not what we saw against Leverkusen. However, it's when you put them in this team that is so rotated and they don't have any of the players around them that do have some sort of momentum and rhythm. It's basically impossible to build that for yourself. Like you can't get momentum playing in a team if nowhere else in the team is their momentum, is their rhythm, is their, fitness in the legs and all that kind of stuff. So maybe you can sort of see the vision of why he would rotate, but this isn't this didn't feel like rotating for the sake of playing certain players into form. Because if that's the case, then you bring those 4 or 5 players in along with the other 6 or 7 that have some cohesion and some rhythm and all that. So it just feels like an absolute waste of an evening, essentially. The rotation, you got no advantages from the rotation other than Erling Haaland, Phil Foden, Ryan Shirky, and who else came on?
Doku and O'Reilly.
Doku, yeah, thank you, Doku. Get 45 minutes of rest, 50, 60 minutes of rest. That's the only advantage to come from this. Because even if this game peters out into 0-0 and it's not some disastrous result, you don't get any momentum from it. You don't get any cohesion. You don't have Omar Marmoush now with 90 more minutes under his belt playing off the shoulder of Erling Haaland. You don't have Ryan Aït-Nouri linking up with Jeremy Doku down the left wing, a partnership that we may need later in the season if Nico O'Reilly gets injured. You get nothing from it. There's absolutely no. I know this is just sheer negativity at this point, but even if it goes somewhat well, even if it's not an absolute train wreck like it was, you don't really get anything from it.
Yeah. I said exactly the same coming out of the ground. You make a call like that to change 10 players. You almost you move the goalposts, I think, away from just a win being enough. Because had City, for example, and at that point you've probably made a few changes anyway, but in this theoretical world, had City won with a scrappy goal at the end, 1-0 win, but there hadn't been any changes. It was the same 11 that started the game that finished it and got the win. You're going, yeah, okay, they got the win, but what have we learned? What have we taken away? Because this 11 isn't playing together again. They've not built the confidence in the sense that they've gone out there and they've beaten a good team convincingly. They've scraped the backsides across the finishing line just about, and you go, right, okay, we got away with that. As Jesus Christ, we're light years away from that sort of theoretical world where we sit currently, and you put full confidence in the lads and the manager and a set of what is still very good players and a very good squad, regardless of who's rolled out on Saturday against Leeds to put it right. But again, it just feels like the target has been put on your back, and we've not even spoken about Leverkusen, we've not even spoken about the opposition, who I think goes about saying were absolutely good money for the win. But can you imagine sitting there in the dressing room an hour? And don't get me wrong, I think there was some people on Twitter saying, wait until you see Pep's lineup tonight, and we've seen that before, and you're thinking, okay, fair enough. What is it? Phil Foden holding midfielder or something daft like that. I don't think anyone predicted this. But imagine you in the dressing room and you see that coming out. Again, for me, I go back to arrogance. I just think that's the sort of stuff that the manager doesn't even need to do a team talk. You just stick the starting lineup on the wall and say, this is what they think of you, lads.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think at the end of the day, it comes back to absolutely fine if you want to get 5-6 of these players into the fold, get them some sort of rhythm and momentum and all those buzzwords. But you do it over time. You don't do it all at once when everybody you're bringing into the team has, rust to shake off, and you get punished for it. You're not immune to it just because you've won 6 league titles in 8 years or whatever it is.
Savinho, yikes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's the two wingers, right? Savinho and Oscar Bob. I think that everyone was sort of bemoaning all evening, and Savinho more than Bob because he stayed on. I think he played 90 minutes.
Yeah, remarkably.
This wasn't the Savinho we saw last season.
No.
Savinho we saw last season in a much worse team, by the way, a far lower functioning City team, getting into the right areas. I actually think he still does sort of get into the right areas and does a lot of the right things. It's almost feeling a little Doku-y with Savinho at the moment, which is he gets himself into bright positions. He'll take on a man, he'll beat them to the touchline or to the byline. And once he gets there, though, it's disaster. I think Oscar Bob is sort of the same way. Like we know because of Oscar Bob's footballing education, since he's been here since he was a teenager, and he's been training with the first team for like 4 or 5 seasons now. We know he's typically going to make the right decision. He's going to be in the right place. He's going to know when to slow it down, speed it up, all that kind of stuff. And both Savinho and Bob at the moment, it just feels like the final pass, the decision at the end of whatever bright position they got themselves in, is just an utter disaster. And it feels like they're playing blindfolded at times. So I don't really know where you go from here with them, to be honest, because
it's probably a 65 million quid for 65 million pound bid for Antoine Semenyo. Because I take the comparisons with Savinho and Bob. For me, and this is going to sound, it's like picking whether or not you want to piss or shit yourself at this point, because both of their performance levels have been poor. Well, you probably want to piss yourself, don't you? If we're being honest, above shitting yourself. Anyway,
let me think
I think
that.
Like, you say it last year, we did see Savinho, and we have at times this season. Villarreal, I think was an example, and I think Everton at home, he got a couple of goal contributions, I should say rather, and he scored against Huddersfield, which if League One mid-table is your level, then goodness me. But the point is that we have on occasion seen Savinho pop up with the goal contributions, and of course Bob has got 1 or 2 scattered in there. I feel bad saying it. I don't personally ever see Oscar Bob being City's level. I feel like he's obviously dealt an absolute killer blow at the start of last season, but I'm still seeing people pull up compilations from pre-season friendlies against Celtic and Chelsea and AC Milan in the States.
I bookmarked a tweet. I'm not going to name the person just because I don't want to be mean or disrespectful. But the tweet was like, what happened to the Oscar Bob we've seen in the past? What? Where? When?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to sound very football Twittery, but he's living off of that goal at Newcastle.
No, he absolutely is.
He's the Tijani Reinders of St. James's Park. Tijani Reinders Molyneux to Oscar Bob St. James's Park. He's living off of that moment. And that moment was great. And obviously with Oscar Bob, I think, again, I made this sort of Jeremy Doku comparison in a way. And Doku's obviously come on leaps and bounds and is now a phenomenal player. But Oscar Bob, I think, is another player that's great to watch. And it masks a lot of the anonymity that he has throughout these games. When he gets the ball, he's silky, does step overs, he'll beat a man, he'll meg somebody way. But then it doesn't turn into anything. And I think at this level, you can only be your education that you had in the City Academy that got you to this point, and obviously insane levels of talent. I mean, I went and saw Oscar Bob play for the youth team in an under 23s Manchester derby, and he was by far the best player on the pitch. No one was even close to him. But the step up is it's huge to play in this City team in the Champions League against a Bundesliga team that won the league 18 months ago. And I think we've seen enough this season to say that at the moment he's not at City's level. And look, there's been plenty of players in the past that weren't at City's level at one point and they were in the future, but it's a tough conversation we have to have now about the attacking depth that City have. And I think if we come on to Omar Marmoush for a second, I think he's one that sort of I still have a little bit of credit in the bank with, because we've seen him do it in other places. We've seen him do it at City. We haven't really with Savinho and Bob. So they're still here to sort of prove themselves, whereas Omar Marmoush, I think, has shown that he can be an elite goal scorer at the top level. But at what point do we have the conversation about Pep's utilization of Omar Marmoush and how much of Omar Marmoush's regression or stagnation in the past, 12 months? I guess he hasn't even been here 12
Taking him
months
off when Haaland came on, I thought was another absolute bonkers decision.
It didn't make much sense.
How well they played together, for a chunk of second half of last season, and we know that Omar Marmoush, and fair enough, you've got Foden and Shirky in there, so maybe there is a conversation about, did Shirky have to go out on the wide? I don't know, whatever it was. Savinho played 95 minutes, man. Jesus. It's just a night of bonkers decisions.
And on Marmoush, I mean, last season when we saw him at his best, it was when him and Haaland were on the pitch together, and Marmoush would maybe drop a little deeper, and you couldn't really send a center back to follow him dropping deeper because you were occupied by Erling Haaland, and you had to stick on him, and therefore you couldn't mark him. And then he pops up with, I think he had a hat trick at home against Newcastle last season. A couple of them were from outside of the box. So yeah, we had a question on the coffee corner during the October international break that was basically about at what point do we have the conversation of going and buying in January to try and strengthen the team? And I was basically saying, well, unless it's an absolute disaster, there's not necessarily a reason to go out and spend in January. I think we're ticking on towards that disaster that would force you to go out in January. And it's not just because there's no glaring holes in the sort of quote unquote best starting 11. The team that played against Liverpool before the international break, hell, even the team that played against Newcastle, you don't look at that team and think there's a very obvious hole to fill here. But I think if you have any sort of ambitions to go deep in any sort of competitions this season, especially multiple at the same time, where you might have to play 3 games to save your season in a matter of 12 days, you're going to have to strengthen the depth of this team somehow, because we learned tonight you can't turn to your Oscar Bobs and Savinhos and whoever else to get the job done when you need to rest Foden and Doku and so on.
Yeah. Bad night, man. Bad night.
Yes.
Can't remember, even on the sort of the madness of last season, and I think we were in a bit of a haze throughout that period, and don't get me wrong, it obviously wasn't, big picture as bad as this, but in isolation, I think given sort of where City had been beforehand, that's up there for me. Like I said at the top, I think given all of the factors that you bring into it, and I meant to say earlier, I know people will be saying obviously Chelsea in the Champions League final, not that you would ever want to. I'm a lunatic, so I did Go back and watch that game. City played fine. You know, it wasn't great, but City played fine in that game. They were a good couple of saves from Mendy away from winning the Champions League that night. I think City could have played until next Wednesday, and they wouldn't have scored against Leverkusen with that sort of setup.
And if we're really talking Pep Guardiola 4D chess here, winning the first in Istanbul, 1,000 times better.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed we look back in this and say it was the Southampton in the League Cup quarter-final of 2022-23. But I don't know, it just feels like a massive missed opportunity and a self-inflicted wound, which isn't something City have been guilty of pretty much most times under Guardiola. So yeah, frustrating. The dust will settle, no doubt. We'll be back tomorrow. Anything else that you want to add before then? Before we go and do some meditation and some spiritual zen to try and sort of calm down and bring ourselves back to planet Earth?
No, not really. I will be on a couple more episodes this week, so I have some opinions, I think, heading into the Leeds game, but we can save those later save those for later in the week.
Yeah. We've now gone from having a quick turnaround to quite a long wait to that Saturday game, and I think, you know, more eyes than necessary will be on City. You never want to be the team under pressure in crisis mode, and it feels like City, after the last couple of results, are teetering on that. Like I said,
well,
you know
what you do when there's a bad result and now you've got some time to kill before the next one. You stick Joe Butters on a podcast.
Yes. Stick around for that tomorrow, listeners. That'll be fun. Until then, though, it's been a pleasure, and we will see you later.